Hi and welcome to the Machine Ethics Podcast. This week we're talking to Matthew Channon about law adaptation, UK, EU, car laws, legislation, automated cars, insurance industry, central government insurance funds, loop systems, cross-border insurance, killer programs, compensation, crashes, strict liability, and much, much more. You can find us on machine-ethics.net or on patreon.com/machineethics. Thank you and hope you enjoy. Hi Matthew, thanks for joining me on this podcast. If you'd like to give yourself a quick intro, tell people who you are and what you're doing at the moment.
Oh, hi, my name is Matthew Channon. I am a co-author of the book Law and Driverless Cars, to be published in 2018. I'm a PhD candidate in law at the University of Exeter and also a teaching fellow in law at the University of Southampton.
Great. So I saw on your information that the book is not going to be out until 2018, is that right?
Yeah, 2018, yeah. So we're going to start writing it next year.
Yeah.
When we have a bit better knowledge of exactly what the legislation is going to be.
Sure.
But obviously there's some parts now which are, I'm currently writing little bits and pieces of it. But yeah, it's not out until 2018, early 2018
right.
At the moment.
Great, and obviously there'll be things coming in the new year about something like legislation actually coming to fruition, right? Concerning the government's opinion on driverless cars, which I think in the last podcast Lucy briefly mentioned about what's been said already. Is there things coming up on the horizon which you both know about?
Well, there's obviously there was the Minister of Transport's consultation which ended. The responses were ended on the I think it's the 9th of September, and just this last week there was also the House of Lords have introduced an inquiry on this as well. They've basically set out a load of questions they want answering. So that's now just been started as well.
Is that concerning the automated cars specifically, or is there a plethora of things?
I think it's the driverless cars is the main point, the main part of it. So a lot of it is driverless cars. And that's as far as I know about it, to be honest. But I think that the main part of it is driverless cars.
Yeah. So I'd like to mention briefly that if you're not in the UK, this is obviously UK specific that we're talking about at the moment. What, Matthew, do you think of when you say artificial intelligence? What comes to mind when you're talking about automation and cars and drones and various other things? What do you think when you think of artificial intelligence?
I think of legal complexity.
Right.
I think of when you think about all of these things, that the law is going to have a lot of adaptation to do. It's going to have to adapt a lot to all of this new area of artificial intelligence, driverless cars, drones, unmanned ships. It's going to have to adapt in such a way. It's going to be a legal nightmare at times, I think. And so for me, when I think about it, I think about the regulatory aspects of it. I think, well, we're going to have a lot of that. We're going to have to adapt ourselves. We're going to have to adapt our thinking, our knowledge. We're going to have to, I always think, especially with these sort of areas like drones and driverless cars, you've got to kind of adapt the public perception as well. The public they're quite scary things, these are. So when I think about artificial intelligence, I think that it's going to be a regulatory nightmare to begin with. And obviously there's lots of ethical issues as well, and there's lots of issues with public perception. It's exciting. There's no doubt this is going to be really exciting over the coming years. Looking at all of these fantastic new developments in cars is going to massively help the economy. It's going to help everybody, really. But part of me is also a little bit skeptical, a little bit, it's a little bit difficult at times to think about all of this and all of these massive adaptations that are just going to be coming on the road soon. It can be quite scary as well, I think.
Do you think we're almost jumping the gun with the technology in that we've got a lot of chasing to do? And you mentioned the amount of legislation or kind of infrastructure we'd have to put down in order for that technology to, come into its adulthood, I guess. Are we chasing our tails, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I like to make a comparison with the original motor car. Part of my research has been about, well, how did we adapt when these motor cars were on the road? So in 1896, the motor car was introduced, and it took 34 years to legislate for them properly. When they were first introduced, they were capped at 2 miles an hour. The original motor car was capped at 2 miles an hour, and you had to have somebody walking in front of them with a red flag, and they'd have to go into all these cities. You'd have all these people standing around looking at them like, oh my God, what is this? And I remember reading an article that said, and it's absolutely fascinating, that within in the 1910s, 1915s, they were universally hated, these vehicles were. They were absolutely detested because people were scared of them. People were actually scared of these vehicles. And I remember saying that people used to throw stones at them. They would slash their tires. And I just think that we've got to be a bit careful in that when we introduce these vehicles, we've got to introduce them in a way that, that ensures that the public are confident. We don't want to just start chucking all of these. They already kind of have started putting them on the road, but they don't want to put them mass on the road and, for them to start really crashing and everything else. They need to be a bit careful with it. So when I look back and I think, well, we need to learn the lessons from the past and maybe not spend 34 years legislating for it either.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, with a lot of this stuff, it's things that have happened before, kind of in society in some way. We can learn for those. I get. So, what is it that first got you involved and interested in cars, automation? And you mentioned drones as well previously to me. So, what kind of tickled your fancy with all this stuff, and that's going into your book and into your work at the moment?
Well, my PhD is based on motor insurance law. So I'm looking at the way insurers are able to avoid or exclude liability to third parties. And my main aim is to see, well, are we properly protected by the insurance industry? Are we properly protected, and are third parties properly protected by, and are they able to get the compensation that they need? So my main aim when I look at driverless cars specifically is to see, well, firstly, to ensure that we learn from the lessons from the past, which was that there were major issues when the motor car was introduced, that people were not getting compensated. People were not getting compensated effectively, and the first parts of legislation were appalling. So now I'm looking at, well, how can we learn from those lessons? And, how can we ensure that everybody who gets hit by one of these vehicles, and although they're going to be relatively safe, they're still going to be acting as if there was somebody killed in July. We need to ensure that people are safe. So my main aim is my PhD doesn't really look that much at driverless cars, but it kind of follows through, doesn't it? Really, with motor insurance and driverless cars, I need to look at the future as well.
Yeah. I mean, what's the biggest pitfall you see in that future environment? Because in the present future, I feel like there's going to be a mix of automated vehicles and kind of person-driven vehicles. Yeah. What's the biggest kind of insurance debacle which you think is going to be involved in that sort of scenario?
It's an interesting point. I mean, the issue that we've got is really, at the moment, the motor insurance law itself for conventional vehicles is kind of the legislation needs updating. The legislation for general vehicles, or normal vehicles as they are on the road now, was introduced in 1934 and then updated in 1988. But however, basically the 1988 Act is very, very, very similar to the 1934 Act. So essentially our motor insurance law is 80 years old. And we've obviously got the issue of Brexit coming up, and a lot of our motor insurance law is actually from what we call the motor insurance directives from the EU. And now we don't know what's going to happen, because we don't know whether they are, whether they're going to apply or not anymore. And the motor insurance directives at the moment, UK law is infringing and in breach of EU law quite significantly. And the government was sued last year, or 2 years ago. No, it was 2 years ago they were sued because they were basically breaching EU law with the Road Traffic Act. So our Road Traffic Act is, at the moment, to be quite honest with you, not fit for purpose. So now the issue is, well, what do we do? How do we ensure that driverless cars and the insurance law for driverless cars, is fit for purpose? So I think what they need to do is they need to get rid of the current motor insurance legislation and have a brand new act, update it properly. And another insurance issue which needs to be decided is, especially with driverless cars and also with conventional vehicles, is where do we insure them? Do we insure them on private property or public property? Currently, EU law says you have to insure everywhere, private land and public land. Although there's a bit of a discussion on this at the moment with the European Commission. And my own personal opinion is you need to be insuring them everywhere. And so you cannot just insure driverless cars on public property. You need to insure them everywhere. You need to ensure that the third party is guaranteed compensation. If you run somebody over on your driveway, they're not guaranteed compensation. They won't get compensation. If you run somebody over 1 foot beyond your driveway, they're going to get the compensation. So it's all a bit of the whole area needs updating, really.
That's a very strange position that we're currently in then. So what you're saying is that if you're on someone's private land and you came into a road accident somehow, that you wouldn't be guaranteed compensation unless there was some sort of other circumstance. Well,
no, that you wouldn't. The insurer could refuse to pay. The insurer would say, we're not going to pay for it.
Right.
And that then causes major issues, because obviously that means that people are not going to get the compensation. So the question is, you need to ensure that with driverless cars, you give the insurers are insuring them also on private land. And under EU law, insurers should be paying out. However, the UK is saying, no, we're not allowing that. We're just not going to pay. The insurers don't have to pay if it's on private property.
Wow. Well, I will try not to get into any accidents on private property, so that's good to know. So, I mean, at this point, we're kind of presuming that that this is going to happen and that it's a good thing, possibly, or agnostic thing to be happening. Do you have any strong opinions on whether automated vehicles in their kind of foreseeable form or in a different form is good, bad, shades of grey? Do you have a strong opinion on kind of the just general, like a gut feeling about how these should work and whether it's a good thing?
There's no doubt really that automated vehicles are brilliant for the economy, for everything. I mean, it's going to save a lot. It's going to save a lot of lives. People aren't going to be, there's not going to be as many people dying on the roads. That's the first fantastic thing. Right.
Yep.
It's also going to ensure that there's, it's going to save a lot of money. I think I read a report saying about $1 trillion in the United States or something like that. $1 trillion worth of money saved through these cars. Or I think it was 272 billion, and then 1 trillion if you count the lives, etc., or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of money to be saved. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll cut that bit out, actually. Right. there may be a lot of money to be saved. It's also just fantastic for the economy. It's fantastic for emergency services because it means that you can have less people being injured. But also then you've got the regulatory issues. You've got the major regulatory issues in this. And they need to ensure that the government need to ensure that they are up to date with the regulatory issues. Although I'm very, they need to be on the roads. They'll be a fantastic addition to the roads. I'm also a little bit cautious that we need to ensure first and foremost, whenever they get into an accident, the injured party is always compensated. Right. So whoever's injured in an accident, they must always be compensated. So I am looking forward to this technology, but I'm also a little bit cautious.
Yeah, I mean I think that sounds oxymoronic for insurers, right? Because the whole act of insuring something is basically you're playing a big game of poker. You're gambling on whether it's someone's fault or not someone's fault, and you make money because people keep paying you for the chance that something might happen, right?
Yeah.
So if the insurers are always going to pay out, what was the incentive to insure in the first place, I guess?
Well, I mean, the insurance industry makes a lot of money. and they'll put their premiums. They'll base their premiums on the risk of something going to happen.
Yeah.
So if they pay out for everybody, it just means the premium is going to be higher. So all that means is they'll just increase their premiums. And I think probably for the beginning, you're going to have quite high premiums for these vehicles.
Yeah, because it'll be a bit of a...
They don't know what the risk is.
Yeah.
They don't know what the risk is. They don't know what they're insuring. So you're going to have very high risk to begin with, I'd imagine. And then they're probably going to have quite high premiums. And they're just going to come down when they know what the risk is. So the insurance industry is actually investing a lot of money in this. But in a way, it's also it's a bit weird for them because they're going to lose the motor insurance business, because motor insurance is just going to keep getting less and less. You're still going to have these conventional vehicles on the road, but you're going to have less of them to insure, and there's going to be less risk of accidents. And it's just so their motor insurance business is going to start going.
And actually, I think Lucy spoke last time that there might be a tipping point where actually, as their motor insurance tapers off, that the premiums for those actual human drivers will become much higher than actually the automated drivers, because that will be hopefully in the long run much safer environment to be in anyway.
Yeah, I mean, insurers are going to have to adapt. That's the big point for them, is they're going to have to adapt their business. And insurance premiums probably for conventional vehicles will rise eventually. Although again, it depends on how widely adapted or how widely adopted these vehicles are going to be.
Yeah.
How wide are these driverless cars actually going to be adopted by people? And I think to begin with, you're going to have quite a few people obviously wanting these vehicles, but the general public, they're going to need to trust them. And if they keep getting into accidents like they have been, there may be a bit of an issue with trusting them, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean,
it'll be interesting.
It's a difficult one to solve. How do you think? Public opinion can be changed in various ways, and one of the issues with the machine side of this specifically is that we have things like Terminator and iRobot and all sorts of different kind of cultural artifacts telling us that these machines are a certain way, that they are possibly never going to be and are currently not. So, I mean, it's a difficult challenge, isn't it, to change public opinion, and like you say, in the face of kind of like these Tesla crashes and Volvo mishaps and things like that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, you've just got to try and, I suppose the solution, a lot of it is about the press coverage of it. And actually, again, if I just go back to the original motor car, what was happening is that the press were literally writing these stories in these newspaper cuttings saying like murder on the roads, get these obscene vehicles off these roads, they are, and the press coverage was so negative for them that it led everybody to believe, well, actually, these are dangerous, we don't want to be near them, get them off our road. So a lot of it depends on the press coverage. If the press properly cover it and they give a fair and balanced viewpoint, then there shouldn't be a massive issue of public perception. So a lot of it's about what people read in the newspapers and in the books and everything else. As long as it's properly covered in the newspapers, that they're not being too negative about it, it shouldn't be much of an issue.
Yeah. So in terms of drones and things like that, do your insurance issues apply there somewhere, or is that mainly legislation implications to drone flights? Because I know that they have brought in some legislation which means that for some private property, some public property, you have to have a license to fly drones now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem with insurance. I don't think it's compulsory to insure drones at the moment, and I think it probably will be eventually once they become, again, it's quite an early stage with them. They are around, but they're not. You don't see them whizzing by all the time. They are around in places, and it's when they become widespread, and then you start to see them hit things and crash into planes, etc. Then you've got a bit of an issue. I read something that actually there's more chance of a bird hitting a plane than a drone hitting a plane at the moment. So
which is obviously good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they're not a massive risk at this moment. They will be. There's no doubt that they will be a risk, but at the moment there's no need to insure them. When things change and they start to get into crashes, etc., then they'll probably have to review and maybe introduce compulsory insurance for drones.
Yeah, and that might be for larger drones, smaller drones, or just kind of like depending on where they are, how they're operating, that sort of thing.
I just compulsory insure all of them.
All of them.
If I mean, these things are expensive. If you can afford to buy a drone, you can afford to buy insurance for it, surely. So I think that they should be insuring these compulsory eventually, just like anything else, really.
Right. So in terms of our kind of cars and drones and robots and all sorts of other kind of types of automation and AI and things like that, what kind of most excites you at the moment for the future? What are the things which pique your interest? I mean, we've talked about automated vehicles and things like that, but what have you been seeing which is really fascinating? It could be on the technology side, I guess.
I mean, I like the idea of these convoys of lorries. I find that absolutely fascinating, that you can just have this long convoy of lorries driving on the roads. And I think it would be a bit interesting to see them actually go on the motorways in the UK and see how drivers react to them. I'd imagine it'd be quite negative to begin with, because trying to overtake lorries at times can be quite difficult anyway. But I think actually that just fascinates me, being able to just have these long snakes of lorries just driving along the road, right, bumper to bumper. It fascinates me. It really does. And I think, the potential for this is absolutely huge. And I think that's why the government is investing all this money in this at the moment, and why the insurance industry is investing all this money, is because automated transport and technology, we're at this stage now where over the next few years it's just going to go mad. It's just going to blow up, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So for me, just the whole automated technology sector is fascinating. And obviously for a lawyer or for an academic, it's even more fascinating, because it brings all of these legal and regulatory issues that, there's so many different problems. I mean, I don't even think we haven't even got, there's so many different regulatory issues. We haven't even got to the start of it yet, to be honest. This is just the start. We now have, over the next few years, it's just going to be so many legal issues, regulatory issues with all of this. And it's fascinating. It really is.
Do you think, I think that's a fascinating point. I think there was something that piqued my interest recently, an article about one of the American states stipulating that for automated cars, you had to have some sort of kind of static ethical thing in place. And that kind of really flies in the face of what actually the technology itself is doing within.
Yes.
So do you think that there's kind of a mismatch between the people who are legislating it themselves and actually the technology that's at play? Do you think I probably believe that we need more technologically adept people in those positions to advise and that sort of thing in the government.
Yeah, I mean that's the. To be fair, that there is a lot of consultation at the moment, which is absolutely fascinating, and I do think that we need to have more, technologically aware people involved in this. But I do know that there's the Thatcham Research Centre, I think it's called, and they are working with the insurance industry, so there is a bit of collaboration already. My big concern with this, especially when it comes to insurance, is I think that it should not be this closed idea that the insurers are there helping with making the laws, being the only point of advising of the laws. And it seems like that was the way in the 1930s. So I think that these consultations should help with the fact that there should be widespread opinions from people in technology, people who are academics, lawyers who actually have experience of this, and not just the insurance industry.
Yeah. And do you see that sort of thing happening at the moment, or are you not close enough to it to make that assertion?
Well, I don't really know. At the moment, it's so far it's been quite good with the consultations. I think the consultation, they have asked the public what they think, which is absolutely fantastic. It's whether they actually listen now is the issue. Will they listen to us? Will they actually listen to the opinions?
Yeah.
Now, for me, I think the one thing that I've been kind of advocating a little bit is, personally, I would actually get rid of this. I would actually say, don't bother with insurance. Now, this may sound a bit interesting, but don't bother with the insurance of these vehicles. Why not just have one central fund run by the government which pays compensation for accidents to anybody who claims? So it's something that was run in New Zealand for compulsory insurance. So what they do is that if you are hit by a car, then you just claim from the accident compensation, I think it's accident compensation board or whatever it is. And then they will pay the compensation to you instead of having all of the insurance industry involved. That was one of the ideas I have been advocating, and that is one of my responses to the government is, let's think of other ideas as well as insurance of these vehicles.
Yeah. So would you still have to pay into the central fund as a...
Yes.
Yeah.
You would pay it via a levy, via fuel, via petrol, or via when you buy the car. So you pay for the vehicle. You maybe pay an extra £100 for the vehicle. That £100 will then go into the central fund, and then if somebody gets hit by a vehicle, they then claim via the central fund.
Okay.
That then means that there's no insurance disputes, there's no liability disputes. So you get rid of all of this massive liability issues. You get rid of all of these big insurance issues, and you just say, well, here you go.
Yeah.
There are downsides to this. It's not this miracle. And there's a reason, there are some issues with this. There are issues such as people claiming wrongly, who's going to manage it. There is lots of potential issues with fraud involving this. But my biggest issue with this is that they haven't put it in the consultation paper. They haven't even put it as a possible option. So, that's one of the things is I think they should have been. So when it comes to them discussing this with everybody, they should have, I think they should firstly have a look at how the New Zealand approach works for conventional vehicles.
Yeah, I think what you said about fraud is interesting, because you've almost got a situation where there'll be less fraud by the virtue of these cars being extremely trackable, extremely wired for sound and vision, etc. So actually, there'll be less fraud enabled by simply using the cars. But that's very super interesting. Do you think the insurance industry as a whole would be pushing back against something like that? Obviously,
yeah, they wouldn't like it.
Yeah,
they wouldn't like that at all. They really don't like that sort of suggestion. Because it eventually gets rid of their whole incentive of it gets rid of any potential profits they're going to make from it. Because I think we need to remember, an insurer is a business.
Yeah,
insurer is there to make money for its shareholders.
I mean that sort of setup is almost set up to enable a central pot, but also maybe even a central transport network. Do you think that the government would be in a nice place to actually provide the cars themselves as well in the operation?
I would hope. Yeah, I mean, I would hope that they could be able to do that, and it may be actually in the end that we get rid of owning these vehicles, people owning these vehicles, and just instead having just a loop system. You have a car come to your door, you get in it, and it drives you somewhere. Rather than you having your own car, it could be that in the end you just have one of these vehicles. We have these vehicles driving around. You pay a bit, you pay some money towards it or whatever, and then it just drives you somewhere.
Yep, like
could get rid of that.
Almost like one of these car club systems that we already have in some cities, where you can pick up a car, take it somewhere, drop it off, and you don't own the cars. You just pay for that trip and the privilege to do so, or some sort of subscription maybe. I mean, I think that's advantageous. I think that's like a really good way to go, and maybe the government would be in a good position to do it, hoping obviously that they get themselves sorted with the technology and getting people on board with supplying the technology, and also the insurance part and all these different kind of nuts and bolts that they have to put together to make it work, and public opinion and such.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, but you've also got. I mean, I think something that also needs to be remembered that would the government want to open themselves up to that sort of liability issue? Because if they're then in charge of the car, if it is their car, they're going to be opening themselves up to being sued if that car goes wrong. So there are issues with that as well, but it does seem like a good option, just to remove the. But also another point is, what do we do with conventional vehicles? Do we keep them on the road or not? Do we say, well, because I still think there's going to be a market for them.
Right.
I mean, there is still a market for cars from the 1940s, 1950s.
Yep.
What are we going to do? Are we going to allow these vehicles on the road to continue on the road? Because eventually they're going to be the most dangerous thing on the road. They are going to be the most dangerous thing on the road, and they are still going to be responsible for accidents. And there is probably a higher risk of accident, I suppose, with these conventional vehicles and autonomous vehicles, because if you think about it, you haven't got the eye contact with a driver. You haven't got, there's a lot of potential higher risk with these conventional vehicles.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, in an ideal world, you'd probably not have any human driving cars on the road. And you'd maybe have a separate road, or you'd have driving, tracks or whatever for people who enjoy driving, want to drive, they can do that there. Yeah. And I feel like that's fine, because I don't know if you've ever been on the M25 around rush hour. There's almost no driving involved anyway, So I think what humans do amazingly well is straight roads, or not straight roads, so interestingly shaped roads, one track, and adjusting to circumstances. So, a good example is if there's a tree falling across the road, we can break the law by crossing over to the other side to avoid that hazard. Yeah. In the short term, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, where we have all the cars off the roads. And also, there's a lot of cars. There's a huge industry, and I think the transitional period, we're presuming that there will be a transition from automated to non-automated to automated cars. That's the presumption that we're making, and that's what some of the automotive companies are working on, and some tech giants, obviously. So there's a lot of money going into the automation, but there's a lot of cars on the road now, and still being purchased and created and things like that. So it might be interesting to see what happens to those vehicles. Yeah. And what we can do ecologically about that, because it's a massive issue, I would say, and the problem we've probably got to solve at some point. Yeah, the ecological issue is the big one, which is, that's a big advantage of driverless cars, is the fact that it's going to, they're going to have less issues with the emissions. It's going to be much, a lot of the issues, a lot of the big backlogs on the road at the moment is driver braking, a driver unnecessarily braking. With these automated vehicles, you don't have that. So everything's just going to be, the whole emissions and everything's going to be excellent with these vehicles. And I think, normal vehicles, conventional vehicles, one of the big issues is the fact that they are very bad for the environment. Yeah. So these automated vehicles hopefully will be better for the environment. They will obviously be much more efficient, and hopefully we'll simply need less of them as well. Because they're more efficient. There's less ownership. People can, ride with each other, etc. Yeah. Yeah. God, it's an idyllic world we will be living in, won't it? Yeah, that's the thing. In the short term, there's a lot of pain to go through, which is the regulatory issues. There's a lot of regulatory pain to go through. There's a lot of investigations needed, and I think the one thing that I would really urge is that we ensure that the government works with all the other governments, all of the other member states of the European Union, all of the countries in the world, to ensure that there is a system which works.
and I think there needs to be cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And even despite the Brexit vote, one of the big issues is we're still going to need to travel between different member states of the European Union. And the reason why the European Union legislates on motor insurance so much is because it is vital that these lorries and these cars can go between member states without having different insurance requirements.
Right, I see.
What happened before was that they'd have these little green cards, which they would then show at the border to say that they had valid insurance at their own member state. The issue with that is that there were queues miles long, people having to show these green cards, etc. So what they need to ensure is that they work together with all the other member states of the European Union to ensure that there's a system that, that we maybe have very similar regulatory systems, or systems that at least don't, contrast too much, because otherwise you're going to have massive issues with travelling across border. So that's a massive issue that they need to really address, is that we have very similar standards of compensation protection and very similar standards of insurance.
Well, do you think that it might be one of those things that we just don't have cross-border travel on this network to get over that kind of issue?
Oh no, you need to, because these lorries need to be travelling across the trade. These convoys need to be travelling across border.
Right.
Trade is massive. So with these lorries, especially these long snakes of lorries, you need to be travelling across border. So that they need to have these these insurance requirements that are very similar to each other.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction.
Right. I don't know if we explained earlier, but the snakes of lorries are kind of like a train-like convoy, because if they're automated, they can get much closer to one another and travel at the same pace, basically. Almost like one large vehicle. Yeah. So what do you think is scary? What is the things that are worrisome in this kind of computer world at the moment?
Well, obviously you see these films, iRobot. There gets to a point when these robots, etc. If you give them too much and they start to make decisions for themselves, it does seem, if you do watch some of these films, it's quite scary. Robots taking over the world. I don't think that's going to happen, but you've also got to be quite careful with it. You do have to be quite careful with exactly what we program these machines to do. And with these driverless cars especially, you are pretty much programming them to kill, if you think about it, because they're going to have to make these ethical decisions. They're going to have to, obviously I've seen the trolley problem, and there are issues whereby if a driverless car is on the road and it has to choose, it can't stop, so you've got a group of children in the middle of the road, or you've got somebody on the side of the road. Who do you choose to and it can't stop? Who do in a way you are programming these cars to kill. So it is quite it can be quite dangerous, and it can be quite, when you think about it properly, it can be quite difficult, because you are going to have these robots and these cars and these drones, and there is potential for catastrophe along with the brilliant benefits of them. Yeah,
and I guess one of the arguments for the use of these cars in the face of this kind of catastrophe is that there'll be many, many fewer accidents, but one or two larger accidents or catastrophes where there is no people at fault. So there's a strange reaction to how people feel about the situation, considering there's no actual human necessarily in control of that situation.
But the issue here, though, again, is with hacking, with people doing things they shouldn't be doing with these vehicles, and there is potential for people to be interfering with these vehicles, hacking them, etc. And the legal response to this has to be quite careful, I suppose. And one of the questions in the consultation paper was, do we still compensate an innocent victim due to hacking? So if somebody hacks a car, should the insurer still have to pay for anybody it runs over? The answer to that is an obvious yes. Even if even if the car is hacked, or even if the car is massively manipulated or whatever else, or is used for horrendous purposes, the key point is you always compensate the person who has been hit by that car. And that needs to be that needs to be at the forefront of any legislation or any regulatory response, is that subject to what we call fault, so subject to liability issues, which there can be some issues with contributory negligence, etc. You need to be compensating whoever gets hit by these cars, subject to obviously laws of negligence. Yeah. So it's a massive issue. But if somebody hacks a car, the point to make is that the third party or the innocent victim has to be compensated.
Can I make a scenario that I thought of in a way which might get in the way of always compensate, which is, given a car reacting in a certain way, someone might almost step out in front of a car on purpose in order that they know that there will be some sort of reaction from the car, which is some way predictable. You might put yourself in danger, but you won't necessarily put yourself in fatal danger in order to game the system, get that compensation maybe. Or, put someone else at harm in doing so.
Yeah, that's an issue. That's a major issue. But first it depends on the stage of automation. It depends on at what stage the automation is. If it's a fully autonomous car, and that car then malfunctions and runs this person over, then that person should be compensated because the car has malfunctioned. If you're at an earlier stage of automation and that somebody just walks in front of it, then that's their own fault. And again, a lot of it's due to contributory negligence. It's about whose fault was it. Now there is a system called strict liability whereby you just pay for anything. You pay for no matter what's happened. There's a few exceptions, but if you end up walking in front of a car, you get the compensation. If you end up doing something on purpose, you'll probably get prosecuted. But basically strict liability means there is no issues with contribution in the end. So that is an option, strict liability, and I think we may go down that route. It may be that they do decide to go down that route and they say, right, we'll just have strict liability for everything.
Yeah. And maybe that the risk in doing so is less than overall with the numbers that might be trying to get in the system.
But the interesting thing is that the European Union is in favour of strict liability. The European Union wants strict liability across the board. It recommended it in its fifth directive, and then it had to be its fifth motor insurance directive, and then they withdrew it in the end due to some member states' disapproval. The potential there is huge that there could be, and the European Union could say, let's just have strict liability, and that won't be very popular because that will then have the newspaper headlines of people, who are walking in front of these cars, getting run over. Well, that's not going to be very popular with the general public, I don't think.
No. I mean, is that specifically for the automated cars, or is that for cars generally?
Well, the interesting point is that the motor insurance directives regulate automated vehicles. So there was an impact assessment due to a case from the European Court of Justice. Anyway, the impact assessment said that automated vehicles are covered and are defined as a normal vehicle, and therefore, under the motor insurance directives, they have to be covered on private land. They have to be covered. There can be no exclusions of liability, etc. So actually, theoretically, in the future, if they decide to introduce another directive, they could say, let's have strict liability. And that is a potential option.
Cool. Well, I mean, it sounds less hazy from an administrative point of view. It's much easier to handle. So I guess we're getting to the end here. Is there anything else that you would like to have a little quick tout about? Obviously, you got the book coming out in a year and a bit. Is there anything that's coming up you'd like to talk about?
I mean, there's obviously at the moment there's been with all of these developments. There are a lot of publications going out. For myself, I've been publishing in different journals. I had an article published in an Italian journal just this last month. I'm publishing quite a lot, and if anybody who's kind of not really, because the insurance aspects can be quite complicated, there is an article on the conversation which can be, there's a web page called Conversation which I've written, so there's a lot of articles coming out from both myself, and I think Lucy's also writing a fair bit. So there is a lot of fantastic publications going out there, really. So although the book is in a year and a half's time, there is still going to be a lot of comment, and this area is really getting exciting now. Over the next year, it's going to be absolutely brilliant. There's going to be so much going on.
Cool. And where can people find these sorts of articles that you've been writing?
A lot of them are online, free to view. So some of them are on, if you just Google driverless cars law, etc., they're there. But I do put there are some of them that I put online myself.
Yeah.
So I've got my own Twitter feed as well.
Yep.
Which can be viewed and accessed.
And what's your Twitter handle?
It's Matthew Channon, and it's just underscore afterwards.
Matthew Channon _. Cool.
Yeah.
So thanks for speaking to us today, and for all your knowledge and experience and everything. And hopefully we'll speak to you again in the future.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.